Good morning and welcome to this edition of Karmayogi Talks. I'm Adil Zainulbhai, Chairman of Capacity Building Commission, and it's my great honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Rajesh Kasturirangan, who brings a multidisciplinary approach to looking at climate science and what is going to happen. He's a distinguished mathematician and cognitive scientist whose work embodies a unique interdisciplinary approach. He earned his PhD in cognitive science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, it was MIT, and beyond academia, he has translated intricate scientific concepts into insights that resonate with a broader audience. And I think that's why he's the perfect person to explain to us this very complex climate science and what's happening and how we can adapt. He's also the co-founder and CEO of where he leads efforts to harness the power of collecting wisdom in tackling pressing global and local challenges. Socratus is designed as a platform to convene diverse minds, fostering dialogue and solutions that emerge from shared understanding. He also founded Climate Acts, a platform developed in partnership with MIT's Open Learning to foster online learning and global collaboration on China in climate change. So with that, Dr. Kasturirangan and Rajesh, the floor is yours. I've seen your presentation and I think it'll be a very, very interesting and exciting one for all the civil servants to hear. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and Adil, and thank you so much for inviting me to make this presentation. I request that you share your screen with the slides.
Okay, it's on. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Climate change is a very complex and difficult topic. I'm not an expert on almost anything to do with climate change, but I'm going to try to give a presentation that really helps us as Indians try to understand what might be a developmental trajectory for us as a country that responds to climate change as a major world phenomena that's going to impact us in the decades that follow. And the way I think about it is what I call India's story and climate grammar. What that means is that we want India to flourish. We want India to flourish independent of what else happens in the world. We want India to flourish whether AI is becoming big, whether climate change is going to impact our rainfall, whether other countries take either hostile or friendly postures towards us. So when I say India's story, it means that at the heart of our imagination of our future is flourishing India, independent of what uncertainties that we face. Climate change is arguably the single biggest challenge that we're going to face of the many that are there. We know that heating atmosphere is going to impact us in many, many different ways. It's going to impact migration. It's going to impact agriculture. It's going to impact livelihoods. It's going to impact how we live, where we live, how we work. So if India is to flourish in the era of climate change, we're going to have to be exceptionally determined to address it as a challenge. And that's why climate action or our response to climate change should be embedded in everything that we do to develop India into a flourishing, prosperous society. Next slide, please. So, even though it's a topic that has been written about a lot, there are fantastic books, videos, everything, I'm just going to introduce what climate change is quite briefly. Why is climate change happening? And what are its primary causes? And there, the answer is quite simple, because burning fossil fuels for energy, for transportation, for many, many uses, releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide absorbs the sun's radiation. And therefore, if you think about, if you've done physics, say up to 12th class, or maybe even until 10th, you know that energy that is absorbed will stay in the atmosphere or be radiated or otherwise transmitted back to the earth. And therefore, it's going to get warmer. That's a very simple mechanism for why climate change is happening. There is a gas in the atmosphere that absorbs more of the sun's radiation than it would have happened without the presence of carbon dioxide or methane. And there's a few gases that do this, and they have different lifetimes. So once the radiation is absorbed and it is the heat is trapped, it leads to what is called a greenhouse effect. It is as if you were trapped in a glass cage with heat coming in, because glass is transparent and it lets light go through, but it traps some of the light on the way back out. And therefore, it gets hotter and hotter. That's the basic idea behind climate change. Next slide, please. Right? But it's the consequences that are very, very hard to predict. Some of them are quite well known, because as the Earth's atmosphere gets warmer, it's going to start melting the ice caps on the two ends of the Earth. It's already happened in the Arctic for the first time in at least known history. Parts of the Arctic Ocean were ice-free during the summer. And the Antarctic, which is of course not just an ice cap but also a continent, you have the melting glaciers and other phenomena as a result of climate change and the warming that it causes. You might have seen videos of very, very large chunks of ice melting off and turning into icebergs, and those, once they float, will also then melt, and as a result, the level of the ocean is going to rise. So ocean level rise is easy to understand and predictable consequence of climate change. But what happens when oceans rise can be a little bit more unpredictable. It can lead to ocean water salinating what is currently agricultural land, and as a result, you may have farmers who are not able to do the farming that they have done for generations. That's one consequence. But there are some even more unpredictable kinds of consequences. We know that climate change is going to cause more and more extreme weather events. India, for example, has seen cyclones capture, cyclones come one after the other in a way that was certainly not the case a few decades ago. We even have Arabian Sea cyclones, which have never happened. It's going to lead to maybe changes in the monsoon's patterns, which would be quite dramatic in its impact on Indian agriculture. So these are some of the consequences of climate change that are well known, but even if they're well known, it doesn't mean that we know how to respond to them. So as a country, we're going to have to do some major responses to this ongoing warming of the Earth's atmosphere. Next slide, please. So there are two big topics under which a response to climate change is broadly understood across the world. One is called mitigation. So mitigation basically means prevent climate change from happening, because you prevent carbon dioxide being released in the atmosphere. Now that could happen because you're changing your energy sources. So in this image, as you can see, there are windmills, so you're replacing coal power plants by windmills, and therefore you're replacing fossil fuel energy sources with renewable energy. That's one possibility. Similarly, you could replace fossil power transportation internal combustion engine cars with electric cars. So basically changing the way fossil fuel energy is used for all kinds of purposes today: heating, cooling, transportation, agriculture, with alternatives that are from the renewable world. And as a result, less carbon is emitted into the atmosphere. So that's broadly the idea behind mitigation. Mitigation basically means don't let carbon get into the atmosphere, so stop climate change before it happens, or slow it down before it happens a lot. Next slide, please. The second possibility is what is called adaptation, which is to say, you know climate change is happening, but you don't want it to be as bad as it could, or you know climate change is happening and you offer people alternatives to their current living conditions or working conditions that allows them to live and work while the consequences of climate change are happening. So for example, you have a kind of a traditional building, but it can have an AC, which perhaps it would not have had in the past, right? So providing cooling infrastructure is an example of an adaptation measure that allows human societies to respond to climate change in the adaptation mindset. There are many such adaptation measures that can be taken. Better access to water, better access to shelter, better access to work that is not in the sun. All of those would be adaptation measures, and India will have to undertake many of them. Thank you. But climate change isn't really the whole story of what is happening to the planet today. It might be the biggest story, but it's definitely not the whole story. And the way to understand climate change as a phenomenon that is caused by humans is to frame it in a geological time frame and say that really what we're living in is the Anthropocene. So Anthropocene, as the name suggests, anthro means man, and therefore Anthropocene means that this is the age of human beings. Right? Human beings dominate the earth in a way that no other species has done before. Maybe the dinosaurs used to do that, but that was a really long time ago, Jurassic era, 65 million years ago or more. And so after the asteroid killed all the dinosaurs, mammals took over, and we are the most successful mammal ever. And so the Anthropocene, as the rule of human beings, is the era, the geological era, and I'm going to say why I mean geological in a second. It's a geological era in which human beings dominate the earth. And geological because actually the impact of human beings is felt not just on our societies, but on the very rocks and mountains of the planet. So the oceans have plastic all over them. And that's an example. There's probably more plastic in the oceans now than many species of fish or phytoplankton and other organisms. So what human beings have done has impacted not just our world, but also the planet outside of human society. And climate change is really one aspect of this Anthropocene. I'm going to mention two important consequences that we don't associate with climate change, but are very much part of the Anthropocene. The first is the, you could say, large animal mass that inhabits the earth. So here's a shocking statistic. If you think of all the mammals that inhabit the earth, only 4%, and that could be even less now, only 4% of them are wild mammals. So 96% of all mammalian mass, so by weight, 96% of all mammals are animals that human beings use for food or for protection, for clothing, all the uses that we have for livestock. So 96% of all mammals are either human beings or cows or pigs or goats, creatures that are attached to human beings in some fashion or the other. Only 4% are tigers and leopards and whales and other such creatures. So that's a pretty amazing example of human domination. Next slide, please. Right? Another example, but this time it's a second order consequence that has come back to haunt us in the last few years, is of course the pandemic and the possibility of zoonotic diseases that can cause immense harm to human societies. So the coronavirus is of course the best known, but we know that there are many other diseases that can spread from livestock to humans and cause havoc to our lives. So a virus essentially stopped human activity for years, and the only reason the pandemic happened is because we dominate the earth, right? It's because it was able to spread through airlines and shipping and other such mechanisms through which human societies trade and collaborate and work with each other. So the Anthropocene is not always just humans being bad to others, it's also the consequences of our interconnectedness on our own lives. So next slide, please. So the human age, so the Anthropocene being the age of humanity, actually requires human solutions. It's not enough to have technical solutions. It requires us to be cleverer, smarter, wiser creatures than we are today. And that is particularly important for India. And I'm going to say that perhaps again, as I talk through my slides. India is a young country, median age 27 or 28, much younger than the West. And as a result, most Indians are going to live through climate change. And we have very high expectations. We want to be a developed country. And so any progress that India makes towards being a prosperous, developed country is going to happen while climate change and other impacts influence our trajectory. So we need to be much smarter and wiser than we are today if we are going to be that developed country. So for India and for other developing nations, it's really important that we address climate change and make use of it, treat it as a challenge and an opportunity rather than as a liability. Right? And if I had to think of one phrase that informs how progress happens. Next slide. Thank you. Could have been there. Thank you. If I had to think of one phrase that captures progress, captures in Hindi we would say vikas, right? It is development. It's through development that human societies, and especially societies like India that were colonized by the British and other European countries for a while, a couple of hundred years, we had to lift ourselves up from a really impoverished state, and we have made great progress in doing so. We have gone from very few people being literate to more or less complete literacy. We have access to good healthcare, now better education. Development in India has meant progress on many, many fronts. And development is what makes us into the kind of human being that can tackle the challenges of the 21st century. But development so far has not taken the environment or the planet or climate change into account, because it's not something that we've had to deal with in an urgent way, in the way that we might have had to deal with poverty when India became independent in 1947. So we face new challenges of development due to climate change, and it's about time that we expanded what we mean by development. Next slide, please. right? So it's not just development for humans. We have to think of development as something that helps the planet as a whole flourish. And in particular, it means that we have to pay attention to our natural environment wherever we are. We are a country blessed by many rivers, many forests, many mountains, plenty of access to the ocean. So these are our natural capital, or to use again a Hindi term, prakritik sampada, right? So how can we best position ourselves to develop not just the human society that we belong to as Indians, but also the natural environment that we co-inhabit with? Next slide, please. And I want to say that this planetary development is very practical. You need it because it's the challenge. Climate change is going to make parts of India too hot to be inhabitable perhaps in the next 20 years. We want to prevent that from happening. We want to make sure that Bastar or parts of Uttar Pradesh are as inhabitable in 2045 as they are in 2025. We want to make sure that our capacities to deliver education and healthcare are much better than they are today. So keeping the natural environment in mind, knowing what is going to happen to rivers, what's going to happen to glaciers, what's going to happen to the atmosphere, it should just be part of development planning. It's the practical thing to do. Next slide, please. And this is what I want to say is the challenge that we face today. So there's the Anthropocene as a whole, but I want to call out the Indian Anthropocene as the specific way in which we are facing the natural environment and how that is impacting us. Since many of the people on this call are in Delhi, and the pollution in Delhi is a great example of the Indian Anthropocene. You have AQIs running into the 400s and 500s. It just makes life very hard. I was in Delhi myself a few days ago, and Bangalore feels like heaven in comparison, at least at this time of the year. And I grew up in Delhi, and it was a lovely city in November and December, but the pollution definitely makes a huge difference. And these are problems that we can solve. But we just need the capacity to do so. And once again, I'm going to focus on this natural capital of Prakritik Sampada. Right? As a country, whether we are in forests, whether we are in villages, whether we are in cities, we have the capacity and we should have the desire to enable the natural environment to flourish so that we can also flourish as people. And this is really the route to our future prosperity. And I'm going to talk about 3 different ways in which that future prosperity can be ensured while keeping climate change and the environment into account. The first concept is place, right? Most Indians still today live in villages or things that are of village-like quality. And unfortunately, nevertheless, most villages in India are net negative when it comes to the economy, meaning to say that they typically export low-value items, at least in the market sense of that term. They are exporting cereals and vegetables and other agricultural items, but they're importing often finished products, and the finished products just cost more than the raw materials that are exported out of the village, right? I mean, if you're exporting rice and you are buying pickle this is South India, so people eat curd rice and pickle here all the time. So if that's what you're doing, you're actually operating on debt, right? And so if we think of place as a way in which we can build a better economy, if we can make villages not self-sufficient, but definitely closer to being sustainable and prosperous, you could say that this is a 21st century of the old Gandhian idea of the self-sustaining village of Ramrajya, so to speak, right? So if we do that, we are in a much better situation. Can you just go back to the last slide? So I'll just finish. Thank you. So creating an economy that is embedded in a place, in a very specific location, and where the natural environment of the place is enhanced by economic activity is a major opportunity for us. And it really plays to our strengths and to our traditional wisdom. Next slide, please. Equally important is people, because ultimately India will prosper only when Indians prosper. And we have to invest in a very different educational system in the era of climate change than we have done so today. So, I mean, if you think about it, going back to the previous slide, every place in India will have its own unique challenges as a result of climate change. Some places might face flooding due to rainfall. Other places might face drought due to lack of rainfall. So we cannot, from a central location, plan for each one of these consequences. It's much better if there's a decentralized and adaptive way of responding to climate change. And that requires that the people who live on those places have the skills, have access to knowledge and to technology in a way that allows you to respond appropriately to climate change, right? And so it will need very, very powerful and I think exciting investments in technological ideas, in being able to bring scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom onto the same platform. So for example, if you are a farmer in Orissa, you may have traditionally eaten a basket of cereals that includes millets and rice. What is the precise kind of cereal that is best grown where you are growing food might require clever analysis of the soil, the kind of bioregional geography that you belong to. All of these are things that should be available to anybody who lives there. And so it requires a kind of investment in human development in people that, again, is a great opportunity for us. Next slide, please. And finally, and I alluded to it a little bit, we need new platforms. So if, again, a villager can use, I'm a person who is a fan of high technology. And we know that AI is so important these days. So if a villager in Odisha or in Jharkhand or in Telangana, anywhere, has access to agricultural information at their fingertips because there's an LLM that allows them to know what to grow, where to grow, how to grow, and they can share that with their peers and their colleagues, then there's the possibility of being responsive to any changes that are coming. If there is a flood or if there's a drought, how do you work with your local panchayat and respond to it? This, of course, will happen because people want to work with each other, but technology platforms can make a huge difference in how efficient and how scaled up those responses will be. So again, platform building is a strength of India. We have done a fantastic job in building the India Stack and other technologies. Why not build climate solutions on top of them? I think that's a major opportunity for us to be doing. So these are the three things that I would say are at least initial pathways for success when India responds to climate change. Next slide. So I'll just give an example of how these three things might come together: place, people, and platforms. We know that mangroves are great bulwark against sea level rise and others like cyclones and other oceanic disturbances. Planting mangroves is place-based, so that tells you how place becomes important. But you also need people who understand the value of the mangroves. They know what kind of value addition can come out of them and can build green enterprises on top of those mangroves. So we need people who will know what to do with the mangroves, how they can be a natural resource that's also an economic resource. And then finally, you want a platform that connects, that allows these farmers and others who are investing their land in mangroves instead of agricultural output to benefit financially from their choice. And that requires a platform that allows people to invest in mangroves from far away. So just as there are carbon credits, why can't there be mangrove credits? Why can't there be platforms for that? So if we can combine all these three, if there can be mangrove forests, if there can be people who know how to create mangrove forests and benefit from them, and if there's a way to finance those mangrove forests using financial mechanisms that are hosted on a platform, we would have a win-win-win in all three. So that's an example of bringing people, place, and platforms together. And I'm going to end, so last slide, please, with a wild card idea. Why can't India have a national carbon accounting system? So just as we have a national money accounting system, it's called the national budget, right? We have budgets, we have a finance ministry that accounts for all the money that's spent by the government, it taxes, it basically keeps an eye out on the entire economy, right? So rupees are tracked wherever they are. Why can't we do that with carbon? Why can't we have a way of keeping track of all the carbon in the Indian economy and have ways of making that carbon available, whether it's for finance, whether it's for platform building, whether it is for budgetary accounting. So if India made those kind of massive investments in a carbon future, I believe that it will pay off in a big way in the long run. So with that, I'm going to end my talk. Thank you so much.
Rajesh, thank you so much, and thanks for putting it so clearly. And I think you made some very important points. I wanted to just put a few questions to you that have come from various members of the audience.
Mm-hmm.
One of them says, you mentioned earlier that, areas in UP, Delhi, Rajasthan will get a lot hotter over the next, the next 10 years, etc., right? And what have you done to mitigate for that? Is it that we have to just learn to live with the heat, or is there something that we can do so that it is more habitable, is the question that somebody has asked.
I mean, there are things that we should, of course, do in the mitigation side and in international fora and others, make a strong claim for reducing emissions, right? But I also think that we can pioneer new ideas. So I was in Assam a few days ago, and I was noticing these Jal Jeevan Mission centers, right? So you have ways of providing clean drinking water to people in a village, and there's a standard way to do that. You have a tube well, you have a filtration unit, and then you have a tank, and then from the tank, water goes to everybody. Why can't we have community cooling centers that are similar to that? So imagine, a place where everybody in a village or in an urban area, in a locality, can just go and get a respite from the heat. I think that those are the kind of very large-scale interventions that we're going to need.
Good. I think given how hot things are getting, I think having cooling centers or mist sprays, etc., I'm sure will be very welcome for a large number of people. I think one other question that comes up is you didn't talk so much about water. And one of the consequences, as you said, of change in climate and others in India is water. We're using up water a lot, and the hotter it gets, the more water we use. And any thoughts you have on adaptation for when there is less water, or ensuring that we don't get to the less water time?
So that people in Western India, in particular Rajasthan, parts of Gujarat, have lived with less water for a long time, right? It's not new that we are dealing with water scarcity, but we have to change certain agricultural practices. I can't imagine depleting our groundwater as we have done, and to have ways of recharging the groundwater that has been taken out. So we definitely need rainfall conservation practices that are well beyond what we have done. But in urban areas, in particular, so that Chennai, for example, has had floods in the last few years as a result of essentially paving over marshlands and other such water sinks, so to speak. So we will need, I think, policies that have smarter ways of doing urban development, and similarly smarter ways of growing. So replacing paddy by horticulture or by millets. These are some of the kind of systematic shifts that are going to happen, but they will also mean we need behavioral shifts in us. We need to change our idea of what is good food. So if you want white rice, then you're going to then create demand for paddy. So maybe you replace things in your food basket by cereals and other things that you're not consuming today. So it's going to need a multi-pronged effort to address water. It's going to need changes in food consumption. It's going to changes in construction, changes in agriculture. All of those things, in my view.
So you gave an example of the mangroves and how people, place, and platforms can come together, right? Have you seen other places, either in India or in other parts of the world, where adaptation has brought people, place, and platforms together, and it's working pretty well?
I'll be honest, not at the scale that we need, right? There are small experiments. In India itself, there are mangrove forests being grown, and payment for ecosystem services are beginning to happen for those kind of initiatives. But I don't know of anything that is, say, at the level of a state, right? Indian states are huge. So let's say you want the Andhra or the Telangana coastline to be converted in a big way to mangrove forests, or Odisha for that matter. We will need interventions at a scale that I haven't seen. But I should say that there are other places where maybe with energy, I see more of it. So communities investing in solar is definitely a thing in many parts of Europe and the United States. So that, I think, is maybe a better example of people, place, and platforms coming together, right? Where you can have use technology that your solar energy gets into the grid, and in return you get some financial reward for doing so. So for energy, I see that happening, but not so much for things like mangroves.
And on and energy and others are adaptation, actually. Mitigation, as you said, right? Have you seen any large-scale examples of adaptation? Because from everything that we read, things are moving to a point where many of these things that we talked about are going to happen. No matter what we do in adaptation, what we do in mitigation, it will happen, right? So I think what can we do to do large-scale adaptation?
So that's what I'm saying, that I am seeing less for adaptation, and there is a reason, right? Because you could argue that the West, the developed world, is going to suffer less, and they're thinking less about adaptation than we have to. And as a result, if the future of climate action is more on the adaptation side, it's India that's going to have to be a leader rather than the current powerhouses when it comes to China. I don't know. I don't know enough about what's happening in China to say whether they are leading in some forms of adaptation. But certainly compared to the Western world, we will need to invest a lot more in adaptation.
And is your sense on adaptation? I guess one other question that has come up is, what can individuals do to adapt and prepare for this new age? Fine, state and all is okay, but
Right.
What can individuals do that would make a difference?
Well, there are certain things that, of course, we can do to, again, in the mitigation side, there are things that we can clearly do, right? We can reduce our carbon footprint by flying less, using less materials, consuming more local produce, consuming less water. All of those things are potentially mitigation strategies at the individual level. On the adaptation side, I think we will need to educate ourselves better first, right? As in, what's going to happen around me? I mean, I haven't lived in a village, but let's say that you are in a village in UP. I think the future is going to be somewhat different from the past, because the rate at which climate change is going to impact, say, water supply, rainfall, temperature is both going to be unpredictable and perhaps extreme on several occasions. So the kind of human being who can adapt to that will have to be a much more nimble, educated human being. So we will need, but not education in physics, chemistry, and maths in the way that current education is driven, but in complex systems, in how societies and natural systems respond to disturbances like climate change. So it's kind of going to need a new educational mindset. I would say that that's the single biggest thing individuals can do.
Okay, great. No, this has been very helpful, and I'm just going to ask for sort of two last words from you. As what would you ask both the government and individuals to do to prepare for this age?
On the government side, I would say the three big things to do would be to invest in the people, places, and platforms that constitute India, right? To invest in education for the future, and to create ways in which our village schools and colleges and everything can respond to complex systems. I would say that that's one big thing. The other is to invest in adaptation infrastructure. I mentioned the community cooling center as an example. There'll be many, many others. So to invest in adaptation infrastructure that helps people negotiate climate change. And the technologies that bind this. So again, I'm going to use the Jal Jeevan Mission as an example. There's this website called JJM Brain, like Jal Jeevan Mission Brain, where you can just point your phone at a QR code and it'll tell you what that particular JJM location is capable of doing. This feels like it's very smart. It feels like the kind of thing that we should be building for climate, right? So I feel like those are the kind of things that I think that this government can do, and it can do at scale in a way that no one else can. And when it comes to individuals, I think the single biggest thing individuals are going to have to do is to learn how to cooperate with others, because this is too big a challenge for the government by itself. It's also too big a challenge for us as individual human beings. But as a society that cooperates and helps each other negotiate these changes, I mean, frankly, if we learn to do that, we'll not only be good for climate change, we'll be good for every other thing that we need to negotiate. So I would say we should learn how to live with our neighbors in a changing world.
Great. Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you so much for this very enlightening talk.
Thank you so much.